Hi, and thank you for joining us on another episode of the Mix of Black Girl Magic podcast. I am your host, Yo, it's Mo, and I've got a special guest with us today. This is someone who has quickly become a friend. She has an awesome platform herself, and I think our brains sort of aligned. So I reached out to her. Ever since then, it's been like just an awesome connection. And I am so happy to finally have her on an episode of the podcast here. So I want to tell you a little bit about her, and then you'll hear from the lady of the hour herself. So not only is she a well-educated professional, she is also someone who I think immediately aligns with the mix of Black Girl Magic. She is doing great work in the community through her platform of bringing more topics and issues to light. And so I want to give you guys an opportunity to meet someone who not only inspires me, but is an inspiration to so many others. So without further ado, I will introduce you to none other than Miss Lex. Hi, Lex. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great. And I'm so happy to see you once again and to reunite and just continue to do what we do, which is great work.
Yes.
I'm excited to be on your platform. You're doing great things as well. You know, great people align with greatness. So if you think I'm great, it's obviously because, you know, I think you're great as well. So
Oh,
there's that
well,
part. Happy. I'm happy to be on here. But yes, tell me what's good.
okay. Well, I definitely do think you're great, Lex, and I am happy to have you. This has been a long time in the making, but it is finally here. And um, today we're going to talk about your podcasting journey and kind of how you ended up in this podcasting space. So tell us a little about your podcast, what it's called, and kind of what you do there.
Yes, of course. So I'm currently the podcast host, co-founder, owner, whatever you want to call it, host and producer of Mahogany Honey, the podcast. Yes,
Yes.
Mahogany Honey, the podcast, that is my baby. That baby has been with me since 2018. It was just in the process, in the womb, kind of just getting ready to, bloom in 2020, 2021. And I'm so happy that it's here. It took a lot of things to optimize it, to bring it to fruition, to where it is, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I have so many things envisioned for it, and the sole purpose of it, so people can get a little background on it, is predominantly to serve Black, Indigenous people of color when it comes to just recognizing individuals who are making a difference in their communities. And pretty much I wanted to highlight that. I think that at times we are only seen as either we're the athletics, we're the people, or entertainers, but we're just so much more than that. And we just need to highlight the people who are pretty much bridging the gaps and are in the community doing a lot of great work.
Yes. So I'm so glad to have you here because you have really created a space where people who are not entertainers and people who are not athletes, but are professionals doing the work in their communities feel really comfortable to share, to talk about things that they don't often get to be heard about. And so I really commend you for doing that, Lex. It really, for me, pushes the idea of solidarity, and it also is encouraging and empowering for people who may want to speak out but aren't sure how to do so. So Mahogany Honey podcast, guys. If you have not heard, please go listen. And of course, I will have her information in this broadcast later. So I just wanted to start off by asking, you told me that your podcast began in 2018. So how does one even begin to have a podcast, or, you got that idea? How do you bring it to life?
Well, Mo, I mean, you also being a podcaster yourself, you know how this journey we don't even know how we got here sometimes. And it's nice to have episodes like this and have interviews like this because it kind of makes you think back as to why you're doing this in the first place. So I love this question. Just wanted to say that already. So for me, I've always used my voice. I feel like my voice has always been something that has paid my bills in the sense that, like, I honestly never realized the power of it or that wasn't even a thing until I started podcasting, weird enough. I think at times we overlook our talents because we put so much emphasis and focus on academics and like what we've read, being well read, right? And just like overall having all these experiences and whatnot that we tend to overlook like other things like our voice. So I started as an advocate in social services. And I would pretty much start speaking in public in front of a lot of people. And like, for example, courtrooms. We all know that those can be nerve-wracking spaces. Also, just in like, let's say, institutional spaces, when I would be in academics, I would always be like, oh, can you present this? Or when I would be at work, they'd be like, hey, can you actually do the training? Can you actually like host our meeting? And I'd be like, well, why me? Like why, like, why does it have to be me? And I've realized that without intentionally doing it, I overpower a room. And I've tried to work on that sometimes where like learning when to speak and learning when to listen when you're a host, can be somewhat difficult. I don't know if you struggle with that sometimes, but like for me, at times I'm like, okay, but I'm working on it. And the great thing about podcasting is that it enhances those skills. So for me, just to like continue a little bit further on, I was in a social service work aspect, and I was actually going to school for urban education. And I just started linking like the work I was doing in academics with the professional experience that I was doing, because I was working full time and I was also like going to school full time, and I was trying to just merge these two worlds, right? I'm like, I'm gonna make this work. I'm gonna bring meaning and purpose to everything I'm doing. I've always been very intentional about everything I do. And I realized that there wasn't a lane for me. There wasn't a lane for me, in the sense that maybe there was, but I just did not have direct access to it. And I think I'm honestly still looking for it. So at the time, my chairperson, who was the program director for my program of being an urban ed, they were like, Alexa, you're not an educator, but you're a social worker. And so we still need you. And I was like, how can you use me if I'm not? And like, I don't necessarily see myself as somebody working in an education building, if that makes any sense, like a pre-K through 12 institutional space. Like, I don't think that's me. And so they were like, no, Alexa, you actually are very necessary, because the people who work in these institutional spaces don't get the real scope of what's going on in these urban inner cities. You're in the streets, like you work the streets, literally, you get paid to work the streets. And they need this knowledge. And I was like, well, how do I do that? Like, so I basically was like, okay, I'm going to start doing research on how to bridge the gap between social workers and educators. And I did a whole research thing on that. And my professor at the time was like, you need to start thinking of unique ways to get information out, Alexa. And I was like, unique ways to get information out? She's like, yeah. She's like, when you're an urban educator, you got to be innovative. And I was like, I got to be innovative. What is this? Like, what are you saying to me? Like, it was too much for me at the time. And that was like 2017. I was only 27 years old. And all I wanted to do was party and get my bills paid. Like, I did not, like, I was just like in a whole different space that she was like trying to bring me into. And I felt like she was trying to do way too much for me. Like, you're doing too much, sis, like simmer down. And then I had another professor who was like, okay, now that you graduated, law school. And I was like, law school? I was like, sis, simmer down. Like, I can barely put it together. I barely got across the finish line for you to be pushing law school on me. And she's like, it's in you. You're an activist. Like, everyone sees the potential in you. And I'm just sitting here like, I'm tired. Like, yeah. I'm tired. And I just want to rest. Like, I just want to chill. Because everybody just leave me alone. And so in 2017, I graduated, and I just kind of took like a brief rest, right? Like, I just was like, I need to just figure out what direction I want to go in. What's my next job? Because I wanted to get out of social services so bad. Like, for me, it was just too much. It was burning me out. And I was like, I need to start doing policy work. So when I graduated, I actually wanted to go to DC to do educational policy. That was like my goal, right? Yeah. DC never called me. DC still got my application. DC still got my application floating somewhere. I don't know, along with so many other places, right?
My girl loves DC.
What's good? I was actually just there. And so to continue, I continued to work, and obviously whatever was paying me the bills, which was still social services. And I'm like applying to jobs, nothing's coming about. And I was like, I have so much to say, like, about the things that I observe in my work, like when I'm working in the juvenile justice space. There's so much unethical things that are going on here. And not just that, but also just a lot of things that I've noticed can be done differently. And there's so much resistance here. Like, who do I tell this to? So who do I speak to about these things, right? And so nobody would listen to me. Everyone was like shutting the door on me. Like, I went to this lady who worked in the department of like the school, like a school department within the juvenile justice center. It was like an office where you go, and basically they're supposed to help kids who are in the foster care system, or just juveniles who might be in like pretty much going through correctional like the system.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey sis, hey, I will work here for free. I will intern for you. Like
Okay.
no, that's serious. I was like, I just use me. Like I will do trainings because social workers right now really do not get an idea or do not understand to the full capacity of how to use the educational system where basically these kids spend most of their time, right?
Right.
And so she was like, no sis, we don't need you here, like we got way too many of y'all already, like don't come here stirring the pot. And I was just like, all right, she didn't say it in those words, but that's how it resonated with me.
Yeah.
She was like, no thank you for your services. And I was just like, wow, like you're having people who are actually educated who work here already and you won't let them in. What's really going on here? Are you here for them or are you here for an alternative reason? So again, with the unethical thing, sometimes that I felt like I was crossing, but I really couldn't say, and I feel like you're going crazy and delusional, very quote unquote. And so I'm over here and I was like, yo, systematic institutional oppression is just so real and it's eating at my soul. I don't want to do this work anymore, right? So I completely quit. I'm like, I'm done. This is not God. Please, I'm gonna take a leap of faith. This is like pave the way, right? Pave the way. So this is like all culminating, coming into process in 2018. And I sat down, and I was living in Miami. I sat down. The first episode I ever recorded was with my previous roommate who used to live with me, and she's very vocal about these things, just like I am. She's Haitian, and she and I were experiencing like a very interesting form of racism in Miami, where you think because you're in a diverse space where there's a lot of different people from different ethnicities that you would fit in, right? Or that it would be a common thing that there's a lot of people who look like you. So how are you going to experience discrimination? No, it still happens. Okay. It happens. If anything, it's actually more insulting because you're like, there's so many of us around. Like, why is this a thing? Right.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so I'm like, where do I go to say these things? Like, where do I go to like express this? And I just started listening to my church's like podcasts, because the way I got into podcasting was I used to listen to my churches. Like when I wouldn't go to church, I would just throw on the podcast. And I'm like, man, this is a space where you could just put audio or you could just put media thing or whatever it is, like, and people will like listen to you. I'm like, I want to do this. Like, how do you do this? So I started recording conversations because I feel like I was having these great conversations about change, but like, I didn't know what to do with these conversations. And I like writing, but I'm better at speaking and then writing, right? That's like my dynamic. And so in 2018, I recorded my first ever episode. And at the time, the podcast was actually called Melanin Miami Mommy, because I lived in Miami. So I was with and my roommate helped me like edit the audio and stuff and like put it together, and she kind of like walked me a little bit into the process. She was a little bit more techie than I was when it came to those things. And so that's how like that seed kind of started.
Planted. Wow. So that almost to me just seems divine, like to be influenced by, listening to a church or listening to a pastor, I would assume. And then that really influencing you. It's like, yeah, there's a message in me as well. And I'm happy to hear you say that, because I've always felt that in the past when we've talked, a lot of times like I'll quote scriptures or I'll like say something that I think resonates with my spirit just as much as with my advocacy. A lot of this is based on morals and ethics when you look at systemic oppression, and you also encounter those blocks just like you do in life, and like those are things that you would take to church or those prayers that you take to God. And sometimes that's what you are venting when you get to the podcast, or that's the thing that moved you to make that episode, and you're just like, that's what I'm going to talk about next time. I hear myself saying that a lot of times, like, I'm going to talk about that on the next episode, just because it resonates. And so I also want to touch on the thing where you would run into this space and offer yourself as a humble servant to do whatever is your calling, and be denied, because that's the thing when we feel like we are just here to do what God has called us to do. I know this is how I can be a blessing to someone. And then it's like, oh, nah, So you kind of question that, and then you realize that, hey, God was actually using that no to push me into my yes. And so I believe that this podcast, Mahogany Forum, which sounds a lot nicer than, was it Melanin Miami Magic?
mommy. Yeah. So
Yes.
funny. Because my friend was like, "Oh, sis, do you kind of want to like go with something a little shorter or like?" She kind of was like trying to hint off, and I was like, and I'm like, the Taurus in me, I'm so stubborn. I'm like, no, I want it. This is it. Like this is the spice. This is what I want it to be.
Okay.
Right?
So
Okay.
I get that, and it helps you to, like realize that, like, yes, these things are changing in me. Like, I can change the name, I can change the system, I can change, you know what I'm saying? So it really is a journey that allows you to like be your best self and actually be of service in the way that you feel like you can be the biggest blessing. So shout out to the Mahogany Forum podcast, formerly known as Give It To Me Lex.
Melanin Miami mommy.
Okay, I love that. And so that leads me to my next question, because it seems like you starting this podcast really had an impact on your life, on your career, on your professional choices. How do you feel like starting the podcast impacted you in real life? Because, this podcast exists on the internet, but it's like, how does it change the way you're living?
It's my lifeline. This is so wild. I know this sounds so cliche, but the podcast literally has been my lifeline to some extent, and it's something that I'm still trying to put into words, because every time I listen to a recording, it's almost like that was a stage in my life that like I can see my transformation. Like it's like almost giving me permission to go on to the next phase. Like, all right, you did that. My soul is at peace because you did what you felt like you learned, whatever it was that you needed, and you put it out there into the universe. You're letting the universe know that you went through this process. You're applying whatever lessons you took away from whatever life threw at you, and now it's almost like you can go on. It's weird. I can't explain it, but like that's literally how like it feels for me. Like I can see my growth, and because I can see my growth, I feel like I can keep going.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and I'm happy to hear that it is relieving you, and allowing you, that room to grow and give yourself like grace to let that go, or bit that, purge that. That's a hint to our old podcast episode, but to purge that and start to make some lemonade. Outside of that, is there anything tangible? Like, have you, started buying a new outfit, or do you go to a different restaurant? Is there anything like you can quite put your finger on that's really changed your life?
Okay, tangible. Like, for whatever reason, ever since I started consistently putting episodes out, I've been abundantly blessed, and where my finances somehow, some way has been like consistent. I can't explain it, even if it's not directly from the podcast, but I'm being provided for. Like something is holding me up, and I can't explain. Like, it's really one of those surreal things where it's like I've struggled with, and this is me being transparent, and everyone needs to pretty much know this. Like, I'm in a space right now, a transitional space, where I said before, I left working institutional spaces like the 9 to 5, and pretty much I'm in a break mode right now. And so I'm currently unemployed. Like, I'm currently right now, like, unemployed. And so that process, a lot of people don't understand that. Like, when a pandemic hits and everyone kind of goes on that, like, I was affected by it. Like, I had a job, and the pandemic pretty much was like, okay, just like anybody else who got their job affected or whatever, decided that they were going to move on and do something else. That was me as well. And so, like, that finance part was very inconsistent and unstable for me. Again, I was put into a situation that I already had encountered in 2019, and then I went through it again in 2020, where, like, I don't know if God was trying to like test me about my faith in my finances, but it was hella tested. And when I started doing the podcast consistently, it hasn't been a thing.
Yes.
And it's not like I'm monetizing from it yet. Like, I've pretty much put applications in for grants and like all these other things, and I've applied, but that hasn't came yet. That hasn't came about yet. That's in the process. But I cover my bills, and I'm good. Like, I pretty much have been blessed. I don't know.
Well, I mean, what's more tangible than that? What is better to put your finger on than to say, like, the bills are paid, and I'm not stressing about it. I'm not worried about it. It actually increased my faith. And that is what I really felt myself going through the podcast. That just attaches to me back to like it feeling divine, like divine intervention, or as if I'm like following the path that God has for me. There's a message that it is my job, literally, to get this message out and to talk about those things that you were feeling in that public or in that professional sector. People need to hear that, because I'm someone who I know of social workers, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I'm so compassionate that I wonder about those things. And you were really someone who gave me the insight as to like, yeah, Mo, because for me, when I was changing professional um, or like changing in my career, it was first like, okay, well, I'm going to get out of this private sector and I'm going to go to the nonprofit sector, and then I spoke to you and you let me know like, Mo, it could be there too. And that really blew my mind in a way that it was right. I had heard of people experiencing that, and in some way I couldn't put my finger on it. And that just leads me to like, a lot of times it is that like when you know somebody who's going through it, or you get that recommendation, then you could go for it. Or like you kind of know, you hear about what it is before you step into it, and that like alerts your red flags. And so that's also why I wanted to talk to you about podcasting, because you can hear from what you've shared so far how not only could podcasting be freeing and liberating, but it can also be the tool that brings you to your purpose. And you know that also requires the faith to believe that, like, if I go for it, then yeah, God will be there. Especially if you feel like that's your talent or your special thing. Um, so I want to, I guess, next, like, move into the arts and culture. We talked a little bit in the past about you working in a nonprofit sector and dealing with the arts. And, I know you also have a background with social work. Was there ever a point where, like, those two things merged for you, where your social work merged with the art sector?
Oh, yeah. I honestly didn't think about it at the time. Um, I guess because I was so like hyper focused on like being a social worker. So like I had social worker like glasses on, right? Like everything I would see, it was just like social justice lens, like everything social justice that you don't really like necessarily see how the arts at the time could have played a part into it. Um, but I always loved the arts. Like I was like, well, what else do I love aside from doing social justice work? Oh, Alexa, you paint. Like you paint. You're constantly going to art institutional spaces. You're constantly around like hippies and artists and like people who are doing freelance work. Like just do something that you enjoy. Do something that you enjoy. And that's how I got led into working into an art organizational space. And it's so interesting because when I first started, I actually started at Arctic House. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Arctic House, but Arctic House is um, an immersive art space that's actually for profit. And what they do is it's pretty much they're using science, technology, the arts, and overall engineering, I guess you can say, to put like an exhibition together where when you go in, it's mostly like lights, and it's like pretty much an artist exhibition space, and it's very dimensional work, but also immersive in the sense that it uses like sound. So it's almost like you're encapsulated into this one, you're part of like this exhibit, if that makes any sense. Like you're part of the art. And I worked there, and most of the time it's dark in there. And I feel like once I transitioned out of working into social services, it's almost, I needed that darkness in a weird way to kind of just like feel like at peace, where I was in a space where I was like super extroverted. There was so much hyper focus on me that I felt like I needed, this kind of gave me like rest. And I love the fact that I was able to educate other people about the exhibitions. I was able to kind of guide them and be like a visitor experience person of like, hey, this is a piece that we have, and I love talking and I love hosting. So like it just worked for me. And I got another opportunity to work for this other art organization that is really well known among artists in Florida for local artists. And it's like one of those art spaces that was like very raw, very like respected, because it's pretty much where a lot of artists started from Miami and have pretty much gotten their work showcased. It's called Locust Projects. And I worked there for a bit, and I loved working there because that's where I actually saw the connection between the arts and social justice. We had an exhibit piece come on pretty much women who are going through oppression, like who are in oppressive spaces, especially around the brown and black community. And I didn't realize how impactful her piece was, because you can't see it at first just based off like what you see like in front of you. But once you start like immersing yourself into the like exhibition, you're like, oh my goodness. So she basically replicated her room. This is her room, and you can see little bits and pieces of like the oppression that she's pretty much trying to tell you about in that exhibit. And it's initiates conversation. It starts a dialogue without so much chaos. Sometimes when you're trying to do activist work, a lot of people don't want to hear you. They don't want to listen. They want to like either see something or have something that's gonna start a conversation. And that's what the arts does sometimes. Like the arts actually like starts people from actually creatively doing things from how we're used to doing things, if that makes any sense. Instead of doing it in the systematic way that you usually do it in like like in a like let's say like social service space or just like overall corporate space, the arts kind of go, hey, like let's look at it from like a different point of view. Do you see like how? So that's where I have high regard for the arts and culture. And for me, it came about to when it related a lot to me and resonated emotionally for me, because of I was also in a space where I was seeking my identity more. I knew all along that I was afro-latina. I've always known that I'm black. I've always known that like this is the thing. And I just never knew how to insert myself into certain conversations because of people thinking I'm one thing or another thing. And I'm like, I'm Afro-Latin American. This is really like, this is the thing. I'm a black person that happens to speak Spanish because of colonization. Like same boat, different port. Like that's literally what I always say. For all I know, I may have had an ancestor in New Orleans that probably they made a stop there, and well, before they stopped at the Caribbean to drop off some slaves in the Dominican Republic. Like this is a thing. And then it's like, how do you feel connected to certain spaces at times? It's just like when I go to NOLA, I can't like explain it, but I feel so like I built like this is my home. Like I've been here before. It's very nostalgic, and I don't know if it does that to everyone, but like that's one space where I'm like, this is where I feel like the diaspora aspect of like being black.
Yes. So I can see all of those things merging for you. And that is also the heart of this podcast. I named it The Mix of Black Girl Magic because I just felt all those things mixing. And as I learned my heritage and, I like traced and tried to research my own ancestors, it not only told me more about myself and my identity, but just like you're saying, I was in those spaces and like it just started to make sense. It's like, if in fact, like I'm at an art exhibit, I'm there, like I need to be there. I love art. A lot of ways that I express my advocacy is through poetry, and that is another like creative outlet. Of course, I've got a big mouth, so it allows me to also like, orate, and I make music. I make songs and I can rap, so it allows me to express myself musically. And as much as I internalize those things that were going on in the private sector, in the corporate world, when I got to my podcast, it made sense for me to be able to blend all those things. I could, and even in my reparation video, I could talk about music. I could talk about, who I am and how like it relates to me and how that relates to other parts of my culture and my heritage. So, I grew up knowing that my father was born in Charlotte Amalie St. Thomas. And so that led me to like want to know more about it, even though, I grew up in a completely Black community and Black family. I just was able to like resonate. Okay, there's builders there. I've always had an affinity for the ocean and I grew up on the coast. So whenever I'm there or at water, it feels like a piece of me. And so all of those things just started to like make sense the more that I understood, but I was able to express them fully through art. And I think that helped me to really connect those expressive experiences to my advocacy and say like, hey, I'm saying this because it's off of experience so I can relate to it in some way. I only, advocate for causes that I am passionate about. And I think that's something that has allowed these things to merge for you beautifully because you are passionate about each area from, social justice to art to the podcast and the community that you built. That leads me, to ask, like, when all of this aligns for you, in those moments on your podcast or in whatever you're doing now, like how does that make you feel? It's a feeling that I can't describe, so maybe you can help.
It's it's reassuring. It's the validation from the universe that no one else can give me. And I think that has power, and it's very underestimated, but that is so powerful. Like, I'll give you an example of a aligning moment, right? That just keeps happening. Every time I release an episode, no one who even knows that the podcast exists somehow starts talking to me that week. All I get is that theme. Like, for example, right now I have an episode out on how volunteering, to be mindful of like how we can be harmful. There's harmful practices in volunteering or doing volunteer work, right? For nonprofit spaces, or just overall navigating the for-profit space, and how there's harmful practices in that. And God will place a person in front of me that needs that conversation. Like, I applied for like a position or a job. Coincidentally, I probably applied like, let's say like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they happened to call me about that specific job that may be similar to that, like during the week that the episode was released. And I'm sitting there talking to them about like the harmful practices of like volunteering that I literally just talked on the podcast. And it's just one of those weird things that just happen. And then like I'll have another, like 2 other people like randomly start a conversation who don't know the podcast exists. Like, for example, like old white people, right? And
Yeah.
they'll start talking to me about like that specific topic.
And so I can definitely relate to you when you say like it's reassuring and validating. Again, that's just that divine energy where it's like my spirit is so full right now, you know, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know how to put my finger on it, but there's something about it. My recent episode was during Pride Month. I sat and I talked with my sisters and my partner and their partners, and to them, like, it might have just been a conversation, we were having a good time, but to me, I felt so grateful to have those people as my people, you know, as my community, and to be able to share that as a part of my advocacy, um, to invite them into the house that I built is, you know, for lack of a better term. It's like when I did this, I did that with y'all in mind, and it's coming full circle. And I don't know how to say anything other than, you know, I'm so grateful that y'all are here. And to them, it might have just been like, oh, we're coming on. They call me Moni. Oh, we're coming on to Moni's thing and whatever she wants. You know, it could have been something to them. I don't know how they felt, but to me, it was completely divine that the women who I love the most in this world, who are constantly there to build me up, were now in that space. And so when that aligned, it's a feeling I couldn't put my finger on, but it definitely was reassuring and validating that I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do to continue moving with that podcast. So I also wanted to touch on like you talking about being in that space in the art house, and I believe you said it was called Art House and it was dark.
Arctic House, yeah. Yep.
Arctic House, okay. And just that feeling. So in the darkness, and as you know, my partner is an artist, so I live with all this color. And in the past, I've said to her, you know, you're using white, but sometimes in the dark is where you find peace and liberation. And so for you to really touch that, I want you to talk more about how that felt for you to be in the dark and how that attaches to the light, so to speak, that you share on this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. Thank you for this question. I love the question. This is where it feels like soul work. I know that I'm doing the soul work that whatever you may call the higher power in your religion or anyone listening may be, I feel is strongly connected to, was that time in my life where I transitioned and I didn't know, it was the void, right? The void, when you're in transition, there's nothing there. There's literally, you're building it. You're pretty much, it's a pause. It's a, what would church call it? Selah. Okay. Sorry, I'm having a moment.
I'm appreciating that because I can feel your energy and how much that period means to you, based off of who you are now. And like, mind you, this girl is in North America right now, and I am in the middle of the West Coast, but I feel your energy so strongly, Lex. So I really want to thank you for that, and just like, hopefully, to bring out a little more insight for me, being
Yeah.
in the darkness is a place of peace. I think people close their eyes when they meditate. A lot of times when I'm at the water, I'm at the beach, it's like to close your eyes and then open them and see like God's creation. It is super
Yeah.
inspiring. Was that how
Yeah.
it was for you?
Yeah. And I'm very defensive now about like respecting that space of like grievance at times, because when there's death at times, there's like like people need to feel it. Like you cannot, I hate when people try to rob you of your bad experiences, if that makes any sense. Like I know people want the best for us and they want us to be happy, but at times that can be selfish too, because people need to feel whatever they're going through at times. And because then you missed the lesson, and then it's like you're gonna continue your whole life trying to make sense of that lesson because you never gave yourself that pause. You never gave yourself that moment of to feel your change, to feel your transformation that's like happening. What's that shift? Like there's a shift going here. You need to feel it so you can have hope. It sounds wild, but like no one wants to sit in darkness. Like if anybody was like, "Hey, you want to sit in darkness with me?" Like, no, I don't want to sit in. Like, obviously, that's what you go to. Like, that's your first reaction is like, who wants to be sad? Nobody wants to be sad. Like everybody wants to be like happy, but at the same time, it's like I was going through my Saturn return. I don't know if anyone believes in that or knows what that is, but like Saturn return, and I'll give you like a little idea for the listeners who may not know, is basically a period in your life. And this can happen either in your 20s, this can happen in your 30s. It's pretty much it feels like a midlife crisis, where your life as you built it and you knew it to be completely destructs and collapses. Everything in your life gets affected, like your living situation, your like the people around you, your family, everything is just like deconstructed and getting ready for you to rebuild. And it happens very slowly, and sometimes it happens very rapidly when it starts picking up pace, right? Once like this thing is happening in your life, it's almost like you're lucky if you grabbed a glimpse of like what you think it might be, and if you have some type of idea of what it is, so that way it can get you through it. And this is why I think it's important to share, because a lot of people actually don't make it through their midlife crisis and actually either commit suicide or self-sabotage and put themselves in the circumstances where death is permanent for them and they don't come out the other side. And that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to cope, or they don't believe in a higher power, and they don't believe in like things dying in a sense, and being rebuilt and rebirthing a new view, like that whole aspect of like transformation, what transformation is. Because when we're growing up, right, our parents tell us, okay, you're gonna go through these stages in life, we're preparing you for adulthood, right? But no one prepares you of like what happens after adulthood. Okay, I'm here, like, and now what? Like, do I stop growing? No, you continue to grow. You continue being a whole ass person. And I think that's where people, like as adults, we forget to give ourselves permission to grow and still raise ourselves, especially for people who raised themselves by themselves growing up. And I think that's where my street credibility comes in. It's like, I raised myself. You can't tell me what to do. Like, I know, I literally have been doing this on my own type of ordeal. Like, I've come in with this inner wisdom that God equipped me with, or higher power equipped me with. And like, I can't be mad about it. Even though sometimes I do want to be mad about it, because I feel like, where's the support? But it's like, no, I equipped you with it. You have it in you. And it's like, that's where the work comes in. And a lot of people don't want to do that. But okay, to kind of just, sorry, not to veer off from like, that question you said of how I got into Arctic House. But okay, so I was working in social services, decided to shift, went into Arctic House, and it was dark in there, and I pretty much felt very at peace. I felt very at peace, and I felt like I was going to go through some very turbulent moments in my life. And I feel like it was almost that reassuring aspect of being in there, that like in here you can still find peace, even though you're going to go through some hard times and it's going to feel like there's no light. You're going to be fine, you're going to be okay. And so I let myself grieve. It was like a grieving process of like and it was very challenging at times, because I wanted to do things the old way. At times when I actually got to Locust Projects, like I had so many ideas, and I've always been this passionate, impulsive person of like, once I know you've taught me how to be this one thing, I'm ready for you to promote me into being the next thing. And your ego can get in the way sometimes. So I wanted to, after 6 months of being there, I'm like, hey, can you shift me into being something else? And they're like, hey, it's not in the budget. Like, I don't know right now where things are going. And I was like, well, I don't want to be somewhere where I can't grow. You know, that's my mentality. But at the time, I didn't realize that I wasn't meant to, like, in a spiritual sense, like did looking at it from a logical space, like, yeah, I could have. Like, I had everything I felt I had, like, I needed to be in that position, right? I could do it. But
Mhm.
the truth is that spiritually, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't there. Like, I didn't necessarily like understand that I didn't have the faith to execute who I wanted to be. And I think that even till this day right now, like, that's a muscle. Spirituality is like a muscle that you got to like consistently work on. And because I didn't understand hard times the way that I wanted to understand them. Like, I knew I'm capable and I'm strong of handling like hardships, but I don't think there's levels of hardships that I wasn't ready to like that I hadn't endured yet. That like God was like, no, sis, like you think you know these levels of hardships? Like I'm gonna put you really, really through it really quick, so you can know that there's like different reality levels of hardship. You haven't seen it all. You think you've seen it all, but you haven't seen it all. And so once I started working there, like I felt very stuck again, and things started crumbling even more. I wasn't able to like make do to meet the cost of living in Miami. I also like lost my car right before I like transitioned to leaving to up here up north. So I was actually supposed to ride up back to Massachusetts the day that and I literally had all my stuff packed, ready to go, and I was on the highway, and a car like ran a red light and totaled my entire car. So you're talking to
Wow.
somebody who doesn't have a home. You're talking to somebody who doesn't have their own home anymore. A person who doesn't have a car. A person who doesn't have a job. Doesn't have anything, pretty much. And I'm starting from scratch at 29. Everything I built, gone.
Yeah. And I can relate to that. It's so much of what you said, like, and most importantly, I think it's just that point of like rebuild. I keep hearing you say rebuild, rebirth, or reborn. That happens. That happened in that darkness, I think. And I wrote down two things while you were talking. One was the feeling of why not me? Because you know your strength, you know you're ready for that next thing, like you believe that you could do and take care of whatever until you feel like why not me? And then I wrote down, will you trust me? And to me, that is the next level for that higher power that we're not always prepared for. We feel like, oh, I'm, the superwoman, I can do whatever. But then when whatever that, I guess, throne is or whatever is the foundation that's holding us up, when that's removed, will you continue to trust your higher power? Will you continue to trust yourself? And that's what I feel like is tried in the darkness. You also talked about the ego, and a lot of times when your eyes are closed, and for me when I'm in a meditative state, it is that I want to remove that because just like you were saying earlier, sometimes you walk into this room and you're like this overpowering um, presence, even if that's not your intent. Um, but in that darkness, I am nothing, and I can allow myself to be nothing except whatever God wants to use me for, whatever the higher power purpose is to be fulfilled through me. And when I come into a space, like I need to present myself with that. I present myself in a way that I am easily adaptable to whatever, but it's also because I've learned in that darkness to trust myself and to trust God or the higher power that's been leading me. So more important is like in relation to podcasts, like sometimes it's going to be bleak. Like sometimes you may have dropped this episode that you love and there may only be one or two listeners, but you understand that like when you're fulfilling your passion or your calling, like somebody is getting it's hitting the spot. If you're listening this far, I hope you've taken time to pick up some of these jewels, because every time I talk to Alexa, she is dropping jewels. And what I'm learning from her too is this work ethic, this consistency, that I mean, is such an inspiration. And if you're listening to her story, pretty much whatever life has thrown at her, you can see that she continues to keep coming and continues to try to reach her greatest self. So not only is that commendable, but it is an inspiration, and hopefully it allows you all to see how podcasts can be very effective in impacting your real life. So that leads me to my next question, Lex, and I kind of want to talk about your consistency. I don't know if it's consistency or resiliency at this point, but I love that you keep them coming. And when you do, it's always a high quality of work. You have really experienced and expert uh, guests. I don't know why you chose to talk to me because I'm all over the place, but from what I've heard, you choose great people. And so, what is it, or how do you remain so consistent and efficient, and also resilient?
Um, it's very challenging. I'll start there. Consistency is very hard, as any freelancer may know. Like, you basically are your own authority, I guess, aside from God, if you believe in a higher power, that is. Um,
Yes.
and so it's a lot of you pretty much being organized. I think for me, the one thing that works in my favor is that ever since I was little, I've always been organized. Um,
Mm,
I've never like I've have I am I can I get messy sometimes? Like, yeah, like any other person who just like, you have your moments where you just don't want to like whatever. Like, you eat something and you like might leave it there or whatever, and you like kind of like, yeah, like that aspect of me, like I'm not gonna get like crazy OCD, how people say it, but I am highly organized. I'm very like, and I think that's what makes me also like a strategic person, is that once you are well, when you can see where things fall into place, like, okay, this is that category, this is that, it just makes connections a little bit easier. So that has helped me be consistent of like continuing to develop things. So that's like a personal aspect of me, or a professional aspect, I guess, that cross over as to like what I do. But I also think that putting my spirituality more into practice and exercising that muscle is really what has helped me be consistent in moments of darkness. Because it's so hard to get, it's really easy actually, I should say, not hard. It's really easy to get discouraged when you're doing work that you don't have a blueprint for. Like, it's really easy to be like, you know what, I don't see the results in this. Like, I'm gonna walk away from this. And I think you and I have talked about this, how like we literally probably have thought about walking away like so many times of like, okay, maybe I should like shift into doing something else or whatever it is. And it's like, you got to stay at it. Like, anything that ever grew to be great, it was because somebody actually like just kept doing something, anything. You could even, for example, like in your personal life, let's say that you decide to walk away from doing whatever freelance work you're doing. And I'm not temporarily, right? Let's say now that you decide to take up something like running. That's something I've done where I'm like, I need a mental break. I need to take a second. I need to be in the void. I need to be in the void. I need to be in my meditative space to figure out like why I feel this way. And I'll
yes.
take up running and I'll create a whole schedule around how I'm gonna make running my thing for the next month. So like starting off small, like and staying and sticking with that. So like if you decide that you're gonna do anything, just do it consistently. Even if you're going to temporarily take a break, do one thing that you do every day. And like I think that a lot of people clichely has said that, and I've always been like, what does that mean? And I think I'm actually realizing what it kind of means now. Is just build discipline in whatever way. Don't stop building discipline is what it is. Like, don't stop building discipline in whatever you do. Pick up something, even if it changes every month. Pick one thing and stick to that one thing. So, and then the resilience part also comes from doing the emotional work. You got to do the work. You can't not do the work. I think that a
Okay.
lot, our generation has not really, I think we're getting better than what our parents probably um, have done in regards to bringing more awareness and prioritizing our mental health, because that's hella important. And being real with yourself when you're like not in a good space. Like, I don't think I'm happy right now. Why am I not happy? Like, why do I feel this way? And like questioning why you feel that way. And talking to somebody about it, like actually avidly seeking help when you feel like you need like some extra support that your family may not provide you or your friend may be able to give you. And um, being aware of codependent behaviors builds more resiliency. At times we can be very codependent on collaborations, right? Oh, I'm going to collaborate with this person, I'm going to do this with that person, but what happens when that person doesn't come through? What are you going to do? You're going to give up?
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like those are easily discouraging things that can lead you off your path if you're not mindful of doing the inner work as to like, why are you so dependent on that one person? Why do you think that you can't hold your own in that lapse, in that void, in that gap, in the meantime, until someone else comes along?
Right. So I absolutely agree with the point of like your consistency, you being organized. I can see that in your work and in your platform. Like I can see that you really put effort into what you do, and I can appreciate that because sometimes it is that when things aren't disorganized or messy, it's not as effective. And I think you are super effective because you take that time. And then also like you even having this podcast and coming to talk to me today or whatever. And it's just that you are someone who is super resilient. And so whether you're listening to the Mahogany Forum podcast to hear who Lex is talking to, or if you're listening to hear what kind of gems Lex is dropping herself. Like I feel like in each episode, you literally can take something away that is impactful in your real life, and that is what is, I think, my favorite part about your podcast and just you as a person. Like I like to attach myself with people who hold themselves to a higher standard. And at the beginning, we talked about consistency as well because it's something that I struggle with because of the commitment that I have to my mental health. So I told Lex, I was like, I may have to disagree with you a little bit on that because I am someone who honestly has set in my mind that, I did not want to just make a podcast episode every week with no filler, with no real emotion, and without it being aligned with my spirit. And so that is really a practice that I've used. And I hope that you guys can see like there is an opportunity for contrast. There is an opportunity to do it more than one way. And that's okay. Whatever your process is, go for that. I'm one of those people who I really want to make sure that it not only aligns with my spirit, but I always am in my head like, oh yeah, that would be a good podcast episode, and I completely forget about what I was supposed to be talking about, girl. So what I have been able to do though is find moments of collaboration. And so hopefully when you guys come to the Mix of Black Girl Magic podcast, you hear that like, that Mo has put her soul in this, like you were saying, Lex, and like it's a part of my healing journey. But I think how this consistency and resiliency and efficiency carries over is that it's helped you to build a community. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that. Like, where do you find all these dope guests? Like, your guests are top tier, okay? So how did you build such a great community?
I think one of the most important things that you can have is just being fucking authentic. I'm sorry if I swear, but like, you can, edit
Yes,
that
that's
out.
real.
But
That's real. That's
just
real.
it's just being real. It will filter out who doesn't need to be there, because at times you can. So the process for me is more so just doing outreach. Because again, having that background in like social services and all that, like outreach is a part of that. And so it helps me with community engagement. Doing outreach has helped me with engaging with other people from different areas and walks of life, right? And so for me, I think if people can see that, like I guess like they may see I put parts of it because you can't see the totality of who I am, right? And like in a post, but you can somewhat get an idea of what I'm trying to do if like you see if you see the me and you. If you see some parts of me and you, then I think that's where like you start like getting people and people start aligning with you. So not being afraid of actually like putting yourself out there. And I struggle with this. I'm not gonna lie. I struggle with this because I think the older I've gotten, I've become more introverted, which I don't know if it's working in my favor or at times if it's not working in my favor. So that's a new thing that I'm learning to balance in my life, is newly being introverted. Because I've been very extroverted since I was younger. But now that I'm older, when life has hit you with many experiences, you start to become a little bit more like enclosed, right? And you just want to like hang out with yourself and you just kind of want to isolate. And so I'm learning on how to balance the isolation part and also learning when to be extroverted. So that's a process. That's a process. And knowing like who aligns with who you are. So if this person, I've had many circumstances where people have reached out to me and been like, I love your podcast. Like, I want to be on your podcast, this and that. I'm like, great. Go fill out a form. Like, do the link in the form. And some people don't even, I feel like that's like too much effort for them. If it's too much effort for you to fill out a form, you don't even, like, I don't even want to work with you. Like, I'm sorry, but like, this is collaborative work. This is collaborative work. This is not, I work for you. I don't work for you. We're working for like the community. I don't work for you. You don't work for me. This is, if you're really interested in doing community work, you're going to do the form. You're going to go through the process of like, if you know, And so
Mhm.
people who have the right intentions, some of those little things, those that you put into place, those like if they really care, they'll do it. Like they'll really follow up with you. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so don't be that's another discouraging thing. Like that can be discouraging as well. You're like, well, damn, I'm doing all of this work and I feel like how much easier can I make it for people to actually come on board? And
Mhm.
that and I just so happen to like put myself out there. I put myself out there and I just pretty much consistently try on a weekly basis, at least every day, to put like a post when I'm looking for guest speakers of like, hey, I'm looking for you. If this is you, like reach out to me and just like keep doing it. Like don't give up. Don't be ashamed of don't let anyone feel you like you're a bother. Because I think that's another thing too. I've had people that have like I've had friends where like they'll be on board with you in the beginning and then you'll consistently try to like um promote yourself and be like, hey, but did you see this episode? Oh, you should hear this episode. Or like, hey, or like, and they're like, I'm actually doing this right now. I don't really have like the moment to kind of like tune in or something like that. And you can kind of pick up on them being bothered by how consistent you are in your practice. And
Mhm.
do not get discouraged by that. Like, take that as a motherfucking sign that you're
Okay.
literally doing the motherfucking work
Okay.
and that you are bothering and irritating people because they're seeing that you're actually really about this.
Yes.
They thought that this was just a phase. They thought this was a phase. It's not a phase, baby girl. It's not a phase. Like
Okay.
this is who I am. And I actually believe in myself. And I'm sorry if that bothers you, but that's a personal problem.
So sorry. I
Like
love
that's
that.
not personal, like a personal problem. That's not a me problem. And it's sad because it's like you get to see colors of the people that that you thought that were on board with you who genuinely kind of just don't get they're not there yet, and you can't even be mad at them because it's like how you're gonna be mad at someone who hasn't explored faith in themselves. Like that's
Right.
sad.
Right.
And so you can't even get mad at them.
And I absolutely agree with you because I feel like that is how you form your community. It's like if you're not about this life, then I understand it's a part of my growth that like it's okay for me to let go of that relationship, or it's okay for you to like mute me or unfollow me. Like if this ain't for you, then let it go. But that happens because like I tell you, like I've always been this super cool girl that could rap and do all this stuff and it's so lit, and then when I start talking about social justice and what books I've read and having a conversation about these topics, and that is my content, then yeah, people start to think, who does that girl think she is? But in that moment, it's like I'm gonna keep coming with this because this is my passion. This is actually what I'm here for, and I'm sorry. I actually had to apologize and forgive myself for not allowing me to show my full self um, in those spaces and throughout my life. What you were saying as well, Lex, about how you became more introverted as you've gotten older, and I just attribute that to you becoming wiser. I think when you speak, um, like when you're this super extroverted person, as I am, I can completely relate. You don't always have time to process what is going on. You're just talking or reacting. You're just moving, so to speak. Like I think we both like to do a party or two, and you're just like, hey, having a great time, but you're not really taking that time to heal, to tap into yourself. And so I think a bit of that being quiet is us growing wiser as we get better with time, like a watch. Okay, so this is really impactful, Lex, talking to you about these things because I believe that there are many people who can benefit from having podcasts, and you have a great podcast. So I would implore everyone listening to go check out her podcast, and I will put the information in the description. Um, is there anything else that you would like to say, or that you could um, tell to someone who may, be thinking about creating a podcast?
Yeah, I think that one of the last things that I wanted to say, just to circle back on, like, I think we were talking about the arts and culture aspect and like also consistency. I think one great thing to look at yourself when you're a podcaster, for example, or just a person who gets either paid or who their life work is supposed to be around public speaking, in general, is like we're artists. Like we're literally artists. Like and we should not feel ashamed for not being able to do all these different things when you're starting up a podcast. Like it's difficult to be the person who does the budget and expenses, who's like the fundraiser person to like of your own organization. You're the content creator, you're the videographer, you're the, you're everything when you're first starting out. And like all you genuinely want to do is just host conversations, right? Like when you're a podcaster, like that's the same thing artists say to me when I would have conversations with them in these art organizations and I would interview them. They would be so like introverted or to themselves, and I'd be like, man, aren't you so proud of this work? Like, don't you want to promote your work? Like, don't you want to like talk to me or just do more interviews or whatever it is? And like they would just be like, I just want to do what I do, and that's either paint, put on an exhibition, and that's it. I just want to do my job, and that's literally okay. And I realize that now that I'm a podcaster, I'm like, I hope I can finally get to a space where all I have to focus on is just my interviewer and my interview questions, and that's perfectly fine.
Yes.
That's my art.
It is, and it's definitely a process. When we started, you were just like, Mahogany Forum, that is my baby, and I feel that, like, I don't have any kids, so Solidarity and Co. for me is the umbrella under which I do all these things, and it has really been a labor of love. It is like I'm doing all the jobs like you just described, like, and literally, I'm loving it because it allows me to be and honor like all those parts of me. There is a part of me that likes graphics and I like things a certain way. The videography, it really allows you to have that whole process. I have one more question, like, because I think a lot of people see it as daunting. It's like trying to find someone to interview, coming up with the interview questions, blah blah blah. And some of us are not as organized as we should be. So, what is it that you do? What is your process? I know you said you have a form. Like, how do you kind of, I guess, figure out or manage the logistics of it all?
Okay, so for first off, I try to focus on like a theme. So like if my theme is I want to talk about, like, let's say mental health, for example, like that's gonna be like my niche. I'm gonna find someone who literally, or that person's gonna find me by me putting like these certain topics out of like what I want to hit around mental health, right? So I literally hope that whoever sees this reaches out and it's like, okay, I want to talk to you about like coping skills, and and obviously that has to do with mental health. So I literally send out an invitation. I send them an email and I'm just like, hey, like, or they send me an email after they've done the form and we link up and we set up a date as to like what works for them. And after that, I first always do, like, I think I did this with you, like a meet and greet to see if like you personally like me and if like align with if you align with whatever I'm trying to do. And I think that moment is very important as a podcaster, and I don't think that anyone should like underestimate that moment of a meet and greet, because that's another filter. Aside from actually having people fill out a form, like doing a meet and greet is also very important to see if whether or not like this person aligns with what you're trying to do. I've had many people who send me forms and I've had meet and greets with them, and I have like probably like a book full of people that I never interviewed, because when I sat down with them during a meet and greet, I was like, no, I'm sorry, but like come to me at another time when you have like a better idea as to like what you want to say or do. So you also can't feel bad about the selective process. This is your platform. You can't let everybody be your baby. Not everybody can hold your baby. I'm sorry.
Okay, say that.
Like, this is my reputation on the line too. Like, also it's their reputation on the line. You don't also want to misrepresent someone who like is kind of in a phase where they're trying to figure out like what they want to do. They're not really clear yet. So that's literally the process in a nutshell.
Yes. So that was the tea. Y'all just got the process of the Mahogany Forum podcast. And like, one other thing that you said that I want to touch on specifically is that you talked about, being in that art space and merging art and social justice together. And it just requires you to be innovative and to be and to think outside the box. So that is my spiel. If you guys are thinking of starting a podcast, do not be afraid to create your own lane, as you touched on. Think outside the box, be innovative, manage the logistics in a way that protects your baby or creates boundaries, and whatever consistency looks like for you, embrace it. That will help you to find your community. What you have just heard here is two intersectional Black women who are podcasters who have picked it up in the darkness and rebirthed themselves. And not only has it been an amazing journey for us, but it is something that we are committed to as much as we are committed to creating a better community for us all. And so I really appreciate you coming to talk to me today, Lex. You will continue to have my support. And if there's anything that I can do to support you, please let me know. And the same goes to the listeners. If you guys have any questions about podcasts or anything we didn't cover that you guys want to know, let me know and we will follow up.
Yeah.
So, again, a huge and most gracious thank you to you, Lex.
No, thank you so much. And respect the craft, that's all it is. Work in integrity.
Okay.
Working in it. That's
And
all.
that's
That's
on
all.
period. Um,
And if you want to find me, like Mo said, you can find me at Mahogany Forum via Instagram, via Facebook and Twitter. I'm at Mahogany Forum. And the podcast, I'm streaming wherever you get your podcast at. You can find it as Mahogany Honey, the podcast.
okay, so you will not be able to contact her if you go to Melanin Miami Mommy podcast.
She's rested. She's rested. We put her
Okay.
down.
So getting into the Mix of Black Girl Magic podcast with your host, Yo, it's Mo. I just had a great conversation with my girl Lex. And guys, come back again to hear us for the next podcast episode. Thank you again, Lex, and you all have a beautiful day.
Bye.